Hey everyone, welcome to the first ever Rome Summit. Jason Griffin here, joining you from Denver, Colorado, and really happy to have you with us. Thanks to everybody for taking some time out of your Saturday to join us. We're very excited. I am joined by three very esteemed members of the Rome community today, and we're looking forward to jumping in to a great conversation. So wanted to, before I do anything else, do a quick around the horn of intros to our guests. So we'll start here. We've got Kyle Stratus. Kyle is joining us from Boston, Massachusetts, and Kyle's a senior data engineer at Visit. Kyle, how you doing? Why don't you say a quick hi and tell us just a little bit about how long you've been using Rome and sort of what your primary use cases are.
Everyone, I'm glad to be here. I've been using Rome since about April, when everything kind of like a week before everyone kind of flooded in and crashed everything. So I was partially responsible for that, I think, but since then it's been a much smoother ride.
You were one of the barbarians that crashed down the gate. That's
exactly.
Right. Very good. Awesome. Well, thanks for that. We're also joined by Joelle Chan, assistant professor at the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. Joel, why don't you say a quick hello and again, tell us a little bit about how long you've been using Rome and what some of your primary use cases are.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I dabbled with Rome in November 2019, I think, and then started using it seriously in January. And primary use case is knowledge management, knowledge synthesis for my work. And I started doing some journaling and project management as well in my personal graph.
Awesome. Great stuff. And then finally, we've got Rob Hasefield. Rob is also joining us here from Denver, so same hometown. Rob's an independent behavioral design and gamification consultant and a behavioral product strategist at Sparkwave. Rob, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing pretty well. And yeah, so I've been using Rome since December 2019, late December 2019, and I use it for just about everything. Some of the main use cases are knowledge synthesis, storing knowledge, and also client relationship management, just general personal relationship management, quick capture, light to do type stuff. I don't know. I use it for a lot of stuff.
Sort of a Swiss Army knife. I hear you there. Yeah. A similar use case here. So thank you, gentlemen, for that. Again, my name is Jason Griffin. I'm joining from Denver, Colorado as well. I'm a director of product at a company called One Vision Resources. And I've been using Rome since early 2020. I think I got in it sounds like maybe about a month before Kyle and the rest of the hordes came in and crashed the gates. But yeah, so just about a year I've been using Rome. And my primary use cases are really, I would say, knowledge management, use it to develop ideas, lots of book notes and podcast notes, and developing that for my blog, use it for work as well in product research, and then have gotten really heavily over the last few months into using it for journaling, which I think is a fantastic use case. So with that, by way of introductions, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We have a lot to cover here. Going to start a quick screen share here just to set the stage before we jump into our conversation. So session goals, what are we here to accomplish today? Well, from a high level, we've all kind of gotten together and strategized about what we thought would be the most useful to cover. And we think really, again, maximizing discoverability in your graph, a really important topic there. Connecting and developing ideas, we're going to jump into some of that. Finding those surprising connections in your graph. We all know that's really one of the most beautiful things about Rome. The reason why we love it is it empowers us to do that. So we'll talk about some methods for increasing our ability to do that. And then finally, generating insight. So we hope that you come away from this session with better ideas about how to accomplish all of those. As far as just some quick learning objectives, so more specifically, how do we hope to accomplish those goals? We're going to start with creating navigational structure and sort of graph entry points. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Using inboxes and processing workflows is a topic that we're then going to dive into. Following that, we'll talk about the various roles of blocks and pages in knowledge synthesis. And then finally, we'll close out with a little bit of conversation about overall block structure. So from a high level, that is our agenda today. And we'll go ahead and jump right in. We want to start again with that topic of kind of graph navigational elements, entry points into the graph. And Joelle, I'd love to come over to you to kick this off, I know I've heard you talk very eloquently about the need for sort of different mental models when you get into an environment like Rome. So maybe you can elaborate on that to get us started.
Yeah, I'm happy to start that. I don't know if it was me who came up with the idea. It emerged from our pre-call. We were talking about index pages, indices as entry points into the graph. And I think it became clear that one of the big discomforts of entering Rome is exiting this familiar comfort of the cabinets and the folders and knowing where things are, which is very important, especially once you have lots of stuff, right? But the fundamental thing about Rome is that it's a graph, right? So it's a network. How do you navigate graphs and networks? You don't put things in folders. You have hubs, right? You've got your super connectors, your think about social networks, right? There's that always that one person who knows everybody, right? And you need to go talk to that person. And think about like hubs and electrical networks on the internet. And that same concept, I think, is very helpful for thinking about how to set up places where you can enter into the network and not get lost. And so that concept can manifest in different ways. There can be queries. It could be pages and linked references. And also thinking about that as you make connections between elements in your graph, I think it's very helpful to think about, where are your sort of structural holes, where are your high between the centrality, if you know anything about social network analysis, right? Those points in the graph where you're able to sort of get to many places at once, or the ones that span different parts of your graph is a very helpful mental model, I think, that I don't know if any of us actually had it explicit, but it kind of came out in our conversation as a helpful way to think about a different navigational paradigm from categorization and folders.
Yeah, totally agree. And I know, Joel, that you've mentioned several times sort of using high-level research questions and even kind of maybe more complex evergreen notes as these sort of entry points into your graph. Do you have any more sort of specifics you could talk about there, or maybe examples from your own use case?
I can show something.
Yeah.
If I don't want to hog the time, but yeah, just to make it more concrete. So let me share my screen. So I've been working on a grant proposal, for example. And this is kind of like the writing project entry point kind of hub. So when I don't typically draft entire things in Rome, but I have an outline or collector document where I basically pull in, where are all the different notes and resources. This is very similar to what Rob does with queries, but I manually put it in. But you can see how this is a hub for a lot of different ideas around synthesis, because that's what this writing project is about. And you can see all these references here to different concepts. So this kind of provides like a cohesion between all of these different ideas about, the most transformative insights must come from a single mind. Context is a slippery notion. These papers, all these Z's are evergreen notes or zetals or synthesis notes. So this kind of makes it a little bit more concrete. Here's a question here: what's context for the purposes of scholarly synthesis? So these are kind of collector places where if I know I want to think about synthesis, this will be a fine place to start. And actually, I naturally go here anyway because I'm working on these projects, right? So I naturally develop these hubs and entry points.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know for me, when I first started using it, like it was helpful to see that people were doing this sort of thing with these broad outlines. I tend to think very well in outline form, and a lot of what I was sort of gravitating towards early in my days of Rome usage was this idea of very small atomic notes that are all kind of interconnected. And I found myself kind of pushing away from the idea of having this sort of a broad outline. And as soon as I broke away from that and started realizing that these outlines can be really helpful, like this can be sort of the main point to start, and where you can just start writing things down. and get things on the page. And then you can figure out like maybe this thing that I wrote here does need to be moved to its own page at some point.
Yeah.
But using these sort of aggregation points to get that journey started, I think is really helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
I guess the other point that would be clearer if I had that amazing extension that highlights the indentation relationships is that by doing this, I also create links between each of these elements, right? Because there's indentation relationships between them, and so they're now queryable. These relationships are not queryable. So that's adding another layer of structure to the graph, where now synthesis now has a relationship with this settle. And epistemology has a relationship with this one as well, which would be obvious if I had that that line thing, but I don't.
I'll send you a link to the JS so you can install it while someone else is doing it.
Okay, do it right now. So I'll stop sharing. That's a concrete example of what I'm thinking about.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. I'd love to shift over to Kyle. Kyle, I know you have a couple of different, I think, similar concepts that you use in your graph. I know you mentioned research topics and reference guides. So talk a little bit about how you're using these. Again, going back to the core idea of today's call, we're sort of thinking about blocks and pages. And I know with Roam, a lot of times blocks get a lot of attention because there's some really novel functionality there. But ultimately sort of starting with these top down, like what kind of pages are you using to aggregate and act as sort of navigational elements or entry points in your graph?
Yeah, I have a whole bunch of different ones, and they're all kind of driven to some kind of purpose. So I have ones for everything I want to write about or videos I want to make, and they're all structured kind of differently. I think the main organizing thing that I use for these hub pages are the Kanban boards. Some of them I use for project-based entities. I'll use queries to actually fill those, so I don't have to go in and manually update the status outside of the page for that particular project. My research topics I keep in a manual Kanban board because that is a little more, these are like longer term things that are kind of undefined in when I would be done with them. It's more like when I lose interest. And so I can actually show my research page. Go ahead and share my screen. So I have a million windows open, so I'm just trying to find the right one.
And Rob, while he's doing that, there was a question in the chat, the name of the .js line thing. I know that was something you built, right? I think is what Joel was talking about.
Chat real quick.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Cool.js.
Cool. All right, Kyle, this looks good. Go ahead, take it away.
Yeah, so this is my research hub page. The top are just kind of notes to myself, so I remember how I want to use it. Because that changes over time, and I kind of let Roam be messy, but I like to have some kind of guideposts that keep me on kind of a wider path, if you will, when I'm using it. So I have all these different things that I'm interested in. These are just random things that come up in my readings, or some topic I have some interest in or think about. And what I do, or I try to do, is once or twice a week, I set aside an hour and a half or so and just work on these topics. So all of this is part of this larger thing I call my idea factory. And this is one piece of it. So I have all these different entry points for information and then for actual practical use. And most of these you can see are on my sidebar as well. So what I'll do in a research session is I'll come in here and I'll look at some of these topics and just see what I kind of am thinking about or am interested in at that moment. So maybe I am wanting to go into this deep generalism topic that I write about and I have a newsletter about, and it's just kind of my idea of how I approach work and life in general and things like that. So it has, my research topics pages can be pretty broad in structure. So this is a bunch of kind of random notes, kind of the components of this idea, some references to it. This is some newsletter topics, and I'll go and use a page and draft up each essay I write, each short essay every 2 weeks, and some topics that are coming up. And this is Connor's choice framework. I really like that. So this is one page. This is another one of this idea of, and this is much shorter, of radical hyperfocus. So I have some open questions here, some things I want to do. And it's kind of all over the place. And what I'll also do is, using quick capture and link references, I have some more topics. But what I'll do in a session is I'll jump in, pick a topic, and I'll start either looking for sources if I'm researching like a real topic. So let's say I'm researching NFTs or non-fungible tokens. If I can find that. Here I'll have like a list of sources and things I want to dive into, article notes, and things like that. So my research topic pages kind of all over the place. They're kind of just like that landing page. So I can jump into a topic and I can see everything I've kind of collected on that topic. And it can be a little bit, it can be a lot of things. I can have sub pages. I can have this right here, which I think is just a seedling of an evergreen that I want to focus, or a subtopic to get into. So yeah, my research topic hubs are like really messy, but they just allow me to dump information in, and then I can go in during a research session and dive into these subtopics, answer open questions, have some sources I can kind of dive into, and from those come evergreen notes, research ideas, and all that. So they're really useful to have those it's useful to have those hub pages, and also it's useful to be a little messy with it, I think.
Yeah. No, I was thinking that as you're going through it, and I do a similar thing with pages where just, I've got various headings and they can be inconsistent between different sort of pages. I tend to call them index pages. And I think like having all of those ideas on one page where you can visually scan them, you can be reminded of sort of the interconnectedness between different ideas. So not everything, again, is completely siloed in folders, but then again, having, so having it be a little bit messy. The principle of limited sloppiness is what I've heard it called, where, you want to strive for that middle ground of like, let it be a little bit messy. Don't try to keep it so tidy that it gets, constricting. But you also don't want it to just get totally off the rails. So
exactly.
These look really good. You also mentioned on our prep call sort of reference guide pages.
Oh, yeah.
Can you talk just quickly about those?
Yeah. So this page is like the simplest page I have. It's an empty page. So what I do with this is everything I'm working on, if I learn a lesson from it, but it's not like an evergreenable thing. So this is mostly related to like things that I learned when I'm writing code or something, and think that I might want to reference back to. So let me remove Python. This is just an example. So I'll just use filters. And I also use search as an entry point for this a lot. But these are just things that I've learned that I'll want to refer back to because I had to look them up at some point. And so I can say I'm looking for, normally I would search. So, but say I'm looking for stuff about click. And you see that's that second note that I have here. So I just go and search for it. And this is just a Python command line interface creation package. And so this is just a note that says that this includes the CLI runner tool for testing the interface with a testing framework. And there's a source there. And they're usually as simple as that. So they're not as fleshed out as my evergreen notes, but they're very atomic, very purpose oriented. And evergreens, I went to the wrong page.
You're good.
Evergreen notes are a little more involved than these references because I'm going to do something more. And sorry, my room's being very slow. Here we go, reference guide. So I'm going to write an article. That's a quick sneak preview of my article for layout. But because these are more for my own personal reference and not necessarily for output, but if I'm working on a project and I need to look something up real quick, they're a lot of times less involved than an evergreen or a transient node even. Some of them are also transient nodes. So this one will be a transient as well because this could turn into an article or something. This is about manipulating SVG graphics files programmatically, something that I've been doing a lot lately. And so in my projects, I have this lessons learned heading. I have some code that backs this up. And yeah, so again, it's a limited mess.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing those. Rob, I want to come to you here on this topic before we shift gears. because I know you use a fundamentally different approach to sort of think about entry and navigation into your graph and really make very intelligent and creative use of queries. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm screen sharing now. I use queries as a way of telling myself where to look, very broadly speaking, because like right now for this page, so like if you've been following me on Twitter, you've probably seen me play around with some ideas about like what a terminal emulator would look like if it were fundamentally more learnable and easier to interact with. So this is a page where I'm just like sort of thinking through those ideas, picturing it as a form builder. The ideas sort of evolved from there, but I just haven't gotten around to refactoring yet. but anyway, so it's like I have a good amount of linked references to this 26, but actually like all of these linked references, they're not going to be everything that's actually referring to my idea here. Like I've also just referred to terminal emulators and form builders separately. For example, like queries are going to let me address that to a degree. So it's like when I first created this page, I first wrote a query, quick cleanup to find the right places to cite this. And so I've got a query here for any time I've mentioned any of these terms, CLI, Webflow for giving a GUI to a command line tool, terminal, form builder, any time I've mentioned any of those. And then also it's going to exclude any time I've done terminal emulator as a form builder and tagged that. And what that's going to let me do is help me actually go through a query and process it. In this case, what if instead of creating a GUI UX, it was instead a README that was augmented with a form builder? I think this was actually the genesis of this idea. So one, I'm going to just make a quick block reference at the top just because, but I'm also going to tag it with terminal form builder. And once I do that, it removes that from the query. And so that means I've gone through my database and I've figured out some areas where I've maybe missed the tags, and so that's kind of like what lets you like reorganize your database in hindsight, because my database is pretty chaotic. To say the least. And then, so here I've got like a whole bunch of other queries. So like, what are my hypotheses? Core hypothesis is that being able to figure out how to use a CLI isn't necessarily the hard part. It's more that the UX makes the terminal really intimidating and the failure state's intimidating. I'm tracking my hypotheses there, but like really one of the big things I do is I track my open questions related to just about any topic that I have in my database. So at any point, I'm going to be able to query what are my open questions related to this subject, and so here, just to make sure I'm not just catching the terminal emulator as a form builder ones, but also anything that could be related to it. I'm also looking for terminal emulator here. But so I'm just going to do a Command F search, which is just normal browser keyboard shortcut for a specific one. Expertise. Yeah, so here I've got an open question. What does a new user and a model of expertise look like with the terminal? So like the question there that I'm essentially trying to ask is like, what sort of tacit knowledge does a person have? Or what sort of tacit knowledge does like an experienced user of the terminal have versus a new user, and so I'm actually going to zoom in on this block with Control O. And here I can see the linked references to it. I could have also, just expanded in line, like by clicking on this number here, click for references, and I see 2 references and I see a query related to it. But I'm just going to zoom in on this specific question. And here, expanding out, I've got a query for any time I talk about mental models, expertise, or feedback loops in conjunction with either new users or power users. So I'm not going to narrow, I'm going to use a lot of like or statements here. So like you'll see I'm querying anytime any of these terms are mentioned in conjunction with either of these terms. And just to drive a point home about the difference between linked references and queries in this case, if I were doing this with linked references, I think I'd have to look through at minimum 6 different sets of filters. You know, this is just one query that actually expresses what my question is. And I'm actually going to say I didn't fully do this, so I'm just going to add in tacit knowledge here. But then, you know, I can look at the query results, and I'm just going to collapse that for now. And, you know, under here, under this thoughts bullet, I'm going to start like block referencing in things that are, you know, like results from this that I think are interesting and relevant to answering my questions. Yeah. So, yeah. I should probably
that's
stop
great.
there.
Yeah, no, you're good. I love it. I want to if you could jump back to the page that has the queries all listed.
Yeah, sure.
One point I want to make there, especially for anyone in the audience today who might be newer to Roam and not super experienced, like want to drive home the point here. Rob is first and foremost like a very advanced query user, right? And you certainly don't have to use queries in a super advanced way to get value out of them. So there are pretty basic queries that you can do to pull things in from your graph. And then number 2, like one thing, Rob, that I thought was really cool and just interesting that could kind of go unnoticed is talk a little bit about the idea of just having that kind of friendly language to yourself above the query, right? Like how is that helpful to you and how do you think about that? So if I'm a beginner user or an intermediate user, what's my takeaway from that?
I mean, the takeaway is just that it's going to be a lot easier for you to read. You know, like the way that I think about my queries is that they're essentially me translating my questions into a format that Roam is going to understand because of the way that I've been writing things with page references all along. You know, like, so like a query is the translation of that, but like there's still, you know, my own thinking there, right? So like I just try to make it so it's a little bit easier, but then also part of it is a practicality thing too, honestly, because like looking at what my open questions are, if I had this query always visible on the page and I had all of these queries always visible instead of collapsed under something, that would slow down Roam a lot. Pretty much anytime you have more than a couple queries, like on your screen, it's probably going to slow down your database just a little bit. So part of it's the practical side of it there. I do want to point out actually real quick, just a funny little technicality here. So like right now I have filtered out of my linked references all of my queries. But theoretically, I wouldn't need to put all of these on one page. I could just filter this to include all of my queries to say like, okay, these are the sort of like organizational structures that I want to keep in mind. Because like looking through all of these, like how am I going to know what to filter my linked references by? There's like dozens of them. You know, the queries are meant to be a sort of like simplifier for my future self.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And again, I hope people take the advanced users out there can draw some inspiration from the specifics of kind of the way that you're using queries, but even some of the more beginner users can understand, like you could have a very basic page with a few questions. What are my open projects related to this topic? And then the query could just be a very simple, like 2-statement query pulling in projects that are open, and that could be your list, right? And so there are simple ways that you can apply this same framework, no matter what your skill level is. So I do want to shift gears. Go ahead, finish your thought.
Maybe I can just point out like the parts that I think are simple that anyone could do. You know, like basically just keeping track, like tagging your open questions and knowing that on any page you can filter the linked references by your open questions. And then, like you can do all of these other searches and all of these other looks through your linked references for other pages to find your answers to those open questions. But like I mentioned, the difference is basically that in a query I can do in one step what with filters and linked references I would need 6 steps for,
Right.
But the simple part is really just keeping track of your open questions and going back to those later. Joel Chan, I think actually, he has all of his open questions as page references. And so he can just look through the page references for that question, and there's going to be all the times he's worked on it. And he's doing a lot of, in principle, the same things that I'm doing.
Right.
I need to start doing queries, actually.
Did that convince you?
No, you convinced me earlier.
Okay.
You convinced me of the value of it. Like, I think an interesting difference between queries and like explicit index pages as navigational hubs is that queries are dynamic, and so I think they're a bit more forgiving. So if you forget to like put it on your index page, it still exists, right? And the queries can catch that. And people who do project management really can tell this, right? So if you have like use a query-based approach to pulling in I think Kyle does this, right? Use a query-based approach to pull in your daily agenda and things like that, as opposed to like directly making sure it's like explicitly referenced in. That is a lot more forgiving and part of the power of Rome. And I'm not really using that right now. I think partially because my scale maybe isn't quite as high. If I use pages, then the number of references is smaller than the number of references to a question tag, for example.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And on the topic of queries, there was a question from David in the chat about automating the Kanban boards with queries. So if we have time, I'd like to just show.
Actually, like Kyle, that's great. I was actually just going to suggest that we can sort of shift gears, because our next big topic that we wanted to talk about was sort of processing workflows. And I think the Kanban's a great example of that. So we'll shift into that into that topic, I should say. And go ahead. Why don't you talk a little bit about how that works? There does seem to be a lot of interest in that in the chat.
Yeah. So I started doing this mainly because I'm so terrible at actually updating my Kanban boards. Even when I was using Trello, they'd just be off all the time. So I started automating them with the pages themselves that are actually filling this. So this is my article ideas page, and this is a Kanban board with all the different statuses I use. I've research, waiting, outline, in progress, editing, publishing, promoting, and done. And so this comes from kind of the process we use at RealPython. I'm a writer for them. So I write tutorials on Python on realpython.com, and we have this kind of similar workflow, and I really like it. I'm used to it. So I've adopted it for my own articles that I write. And so these queries are all built underneath these topics within the Kanban. So when you scroll down here, when you actually make the Kanban board, you nest the column titles underneath the board itself. And then within that, you put your items. Well, in here, all I have is a simple query that checks for status, waiting, article ideas. Pretty simple, and not Rome templates, because I keep this in Rome/templates as well. And so my articles all have this status attribute. And so I'll put waiting and article ideas, and then it's right there. So when I want to work on an article, if I'm going to be writing something, I'll jump to my article ideas here in the sidebar, and I can see what I have in flight, what I've completed. That's good for reviews and things like that, and what I want to write about. So I can very quickly, if I have an idea that I want to write about and make a page for it, I just use my template, and it will come up with the status, waiting, and article ideas. I have this related goals sub status. So what this does is it's another query-based Kanban within within Rome. So if I jump to this goal, this one I haven't updated yet. So I started very recently doing this with my goals. So some of them aren't filled out with the Kanban yet. So I think this one might have it, because this is a more recent thing. Yeah. So for Rome Lab framework, this is kind of the process I want to do. So everything, every project, article, whatever that comprises this whole goal, through this related goals sub attribute, I'm able to query with a slightly more complicated queries in this Kanban. So I do this for my goal. I've started doing this for my goals. As you can see, this is kind of recent for me. But for individual projects and article ideas, I've been doing this for a while, and it's a lot more helpful because most of my work is done on the individual pages for these projects or articles or whatever it is. And so if I'm working in here, I'm going to update the status more, or I'm more likely to update the status. I'm not perfect at it by any means. Than I will in the actual like article ideas page. So this just helps ease my life a little bit because I'll forget to update it when I'm not working in the hub page for it. I work in the actual page for that project or article or whatever, so I can update it there.
It's great. I love that Kanban approach and how you have that set up. I may have to steal that from you. Talk a little bit at a high level, Kyle, about your philosophy with regards to kind of these processing workflows. I know you have a couple of different areas in your graph, and some of them you're more diligent about coming back to and making sure things move through the pipeline, and others are kind of just an inbox where you'll put it there and maybe never get to it. But I think this is an important topic for people to understand, is like the processing of knowledge through the graph, and maybe less tactical right now, but more just philosophical. How do you think about that in sort of different areas of your graph?
Yeah. So I think of my writing inbox as like kind of a central processing hub. So what I do, I again aim to do this. I'm terrible at it for the most part. 3 to 5 days a week, I set aside, I block off like an hour or so to do some writing inbox processing. And so this is also part of that idea factory concept that I've been kind of toying with and trying to understand myself, like how I automate all this and how I use this. So this again is very query based, and it allows me to anywhere in my graph just drop in. So the research topics we kind of went into already, so this isn't really anything new, but like my transient notes, I'll just drop these off in my daily notes, quick capture. As you can see, this query checks for weighting and quick capture or transient and not ideas. And so if I ever have something that I think I want to turn into an evergreen note, usually this comes from my articles, but this can be just something that pops in my head while I'm walking to the gym or something. And I'll throw it in quick capture, my daily notes, or I will have it in, I have a dedicated section in my article notes template where I put transient notes, and then I would just give them the transient or quick capture tag if they don't inherit it already, and then also the weighting status. And so that way I just have all these notes here. And when I go to process, what I'll do is I'll kind of go through and see what I want to kind of expand upon. So this study that intelligence had a positive association with polarization. I actually think this is from one of your articles, Jason. And it's underneath the transient notes header. It's also tagged with deep generalism and weighting. And so what I'll do is when I have a few notes kind of around the same idea, this is heavily influenced by Andy Matischak. When I have a few notes kind of around the same idea, I'll try to process that into an evergreen that's more mature, it's densely linked. And this just allows me to have kind of a clearinghouse so I can put it down and forget about it until I have a set aside time to process it and can really think about it. And this query lets me just kind of look at everything that I have and what I want to turn into. So I have that for transient notes. And you can see I have a ton that I haven't even come close to processing yet. It's there. So when I have time to process or the urge to process it, then I can do it. And then my ideas are pretty similar. It's the same concept, simple query. And I'll just tag status if it's a transient note, if it's an idea. And these ideas will turn into maybe articles, videos, projects, whatever, some other more practical entity that I haven't even turned into a page yet. This is just like, oh, I had this flash of inspiration, give it some tags, and then I can forget about it until I have some time to go back to it. So it keeps me from going too deep into rabbit holes when I'm, otherwise busy.
Right. Right. No, that's good stuff. Really quickly, I wanted to touch on a question that's getting thrown around in the chat room, and maybe come to Joel. Just we'll segue over to you to talk about this a little bit. The idea of, and this is going to feel like a little bit of a tangent, but I think there's a connection there. So we've been showing a lot of different pages where there's a lot of idea development and writing happening. But Brian in the chat talked about how a lot of advanced users are really out kind of preaching the gospel of daily notes and writing everything on daily notes. How do you think about using daily notes with regards to, again, that advice that is kind of widely circulated out there that maybe daily notes should be the primary or even the only place to do writing in Rome?
Yeah, I'm not a very dogmatic person, so I shy away from extremes. But I really do think the daily notes paradigm was a game changer for me once I started adopting it. It kind of connects to this. It's a very long history. It goes way back to pre-Renaissance. Like the commonplace notebook was a thing that everybody used, where you just had this daily stream, and you kind of still see it with people having these like time stream. So having that like flow of context through time is really helpful to kind of just dip in and out. And I use the daily notes as a stress-free place to prototype ideas. So
yeah,
right, I actually did this with my grant. I was writing a grant and I was like, I'm going to outline something, but I feel like I'm not ready yet. So I just write in daily notes. And then if I like it, then I can put it into a more permanent spot, but I don't have to. I can just write, and it's still helpful for me to get it on the page and to have references and so on. And so that it feels like this, like the chaos stream, and then having a place to pull things out that will live longer that you want to reuse. But the daily notes for me is kind of like my play space. So that's how I use it.
Yeah.
And when I didn't have that, I felt very restricted because there was a high barrier to writing things down. It felt very like final. But the daily notes gives me the freedom to prototype, to play, to connect, and that's how I think about daily notes. And so a lot of my writing inbox comes from references to ideas or questions in daily notes, right? I'll come across something that's really interesting, just like what Kyle showed, right? Like I see a tweet and then I say, hey, this seems similar to my question about blah. And then I just put it in daily notes. I don't put it directly into the question page because it's very relevant to know when that happened, because probably I was thinking about similar things then that would be very useful to resurface, like having that connection to the chaos stream, as it were, is really helpful.
Yeah, and that you kind of beat me to it. That was the tie-in. I was going to bring this back to sort of processing workflows, because I know that you'll often use those page references that Rob mentioned earlier as sort of hooks to kind of park things in the inbox. So kind of a quick capture. Hey, here's an idea related to something I'm thinking about. I'll throw it in daily notes. I'll reference that page so that it'll show up as a linked reference there. Talk a little bit about, again, philosophically, I'm interested in hearing your perspective on, I know that Kyle has a bit more of a process-oriented approach to at least some of his workflows, and you tend to, I think, kind of let your curiosity drive maybe almost more exclusively in that regard.
Yeah, I think that I can get away with not having a more structured approach because that comes from my job. So like I get this like regular pressure, not pressure, but like external motivation from my students, like working on projects, my collaborators. There's a clip from the weekly and monthly and semesterly clip of things that are just striking my fancy. I go to conferences. So there's this like, I don't feel a need to, I don't have to make it happen, right? So I think that's why I can get away with not having a scheduled time. So I think that's like an important point of context. And I would like to see more advice around usage of Roam be more contextualized. This is what I do. This is how I approach things. And this is what works for me. And then you can figure out if you have similar goals and similar approaches, then maybe that will be helpful to you too.
Yeah.
I think we could do with less sort of broad prescription. And this is why I like the Roam Summit, because you can see the diversity. That's
right. Yeah, that's
Um,
definitely one of the core goals here of bringing all these different contrasting approaches together on one call, so people can kind of see like there is no one right or wrong way.
Yeah, so I think maybe like in the summer, maybe I could do it a bit more. I think I do more scheduled things because it's like free play the whole the whole summer. So I don't have this like weekly advisor meetings or collaborative meetings, and so that's very helpful for me to sort of keep things going.
Yeah.
But I do have in terms of giving a slightly different angle of processing workflows, I can show. I'm going to share my screen real fast. The usage of space repetition mechanics can be another way to sort of give you external ways to nudge you and to have things to work on. So I have a breadcrumbs tag, and then on the page I have various threads that I'm juggling. I think I've got 5 or 6 right now. I can kind of click through right now. And these will kind of come back in at various points. This is, I need to.
Joel, can you zoom in on that a little bit?
Yeah. And you can see, Rob, I put in the, the thing.
Fantastic.
It made it.
There it is.
So yeah, so this came up today, and this is actually very old because actually this is done, but that's fine. But these tags are from the I think it's Roam Toolkit. So it gives you basically a way to have things loop back around to you without having a set schedule, just based on like, I don't want to think about this right now, or I probably want to think about this soon, or so on, and it just kind of boomerangs back. So this is actually helpful for me to come back around here. I forgot that I had these papers I wanted to pick up. So I'm going to do that in the next few days.
There you go. It works.
Yeah, it works. But also manually, like I put these breadcrumbs for myself, and I can actually remove these now because the grant is done. But this is very helpful for me to keep track of like, and this is where my idea about writing in daily notes, right? That's where these breadcrumbs show up in daily notes. Like because it's not fixed in a single spot, but I'm developing over time. I use the breadcrumbs to follow over time. So it's kind of like curiosity driven, but also externally driven from like my students ask me, hey, what do you think about this, right? And so that's why I can kind of get away with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, I would love to shift gears here. We're down to just about 12 minutes. And so it's kind of jumping in. We'll sort of lump our last 2 topics together in terms of thinking about blocks versus pages and block structure. And Rob, maybe we can start with you here. I know that there are, again, similar to other topics that we've had on the call, it's kind of contrasting approaches here, where somebody like Joel's a little bit more, maybe slightly more quick to turn something into a page. You're a little bit more willing to let ideas kind of sit as blocks. So maybe you can just start this portion of the conversation for us and start us at a high level in terms of how you think conceptually about the different uses of pages and blocks.
Yeah. I mean, conceptually, I think of pages as I generally think of pages as like clusters of things. And I think of block references more as threads. I don't know how helpful that is for right now, but that's generally what I do. But also, once you get to like this more advanced level of Roam usage, I think you can use page and block references fairly interchangeably, because you can query page references and block references in the exact same way. That being said, I think that until you get to that sort of like expert level of usage with queries, page references are generally going to be a lot more helpful for you, because you can look through the linked references and you can actually see page references as options to filter by, whereas you don't have that with block references.
You actually do, Rob. You showed me. So I wanted to make this point earlier, but I think this is the right time to say it. You showed on your screen. I forgot when you focus in on a block, you have the linked references as well, and you can filter it.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. I forgot totally about that. So that actually collapses the distinction between you and me even more.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about how with with blocks you can't filter the references, but it turns out you can.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that.
And that's part of why I like using blocks for my open questions more so than I like using pages, just because of where I put them in the indentation of everything, I think they end up with just a little bit more context. And at the end of the day, I can treat them very similarly. But what I mean is I'll actually go to a question right now, and I'll screen share as well. So I'm back on this page here for Terminal Emulator as a form builder. There's one open question in here that actually has 13 linked references right now. So I'm gonna zoom in on this. Like here, I was referring to just the idea of like, are we going to, like, if we give a graphical user interface to a command line tool, would it be something that could be automatically generated with certain abstractions, or would it have to be something where it's more like we give people the tools to turn a command line tool into a graphical user interface? So here I am zoomed in on that question. I'll even make it a header just to blur the distinction even more between pages and blocks. But like, see what I mean? Where it's like, it has a lot of context to it.
Yeah.
Like I could also see what are my open questions that have come up in relation to this mysterious person I was in a meeting with. Like I can look up my open questions related to just about anything. But like when I'm looking through all of the block references for these, I can filter those as though I was filtering linked references to a page. However, the distinction is all of the options that I have to filter by are page references. I can't filter by any block references here. So like technically speaking, page references are strictly more powerful than block references if you're using them for the same organizational purposes right now. But right. Oh, sorry. Someone was gonna.
No. Go ahead.
I just wanted to show a quick workflow that you could do though. If you're like, oh, I've got 13 linked references to this block, maybe I should turn it into a page at this point. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to click in, see this page reference. This is like, or see this block reference, the ID there. I'm even gonna zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to put double brackets around it. Now that was weird. What did I just do there? Wait, I just want to copy that to my clipboard so I can search it in the search bar, but I'm going to put double brackets around it. And now I'm going to go to this page for this block reference, and I'm going to look at all the unlinked references. I'm going to link all of them. And then I'm going to change the name of this to
wizard. Oh my goodness.
Should we automatically, or can we automatically generate a GUI for a command line tool, or will it have to be user generated? Yeah, and so now I have just turned all of those block references into a page reference, and sort of like escalated it in terms of importance.
That's very cool. That's very cool. And again, I think for maybe anyone on the call who's a more beginning user, like there is a takeaway there that is important to remember, and it's that there is no right or wrong way. And one of the beautiful things about Roam is that it's very forgiving in the sense that things can be changed and sort of restructured over time. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to get it right the first time. And so like Rob's trick there is just one example of where, okay, should I make this a block or should I make it a page? Well, don't get too hung up on that, right? Because there's always ways to make those adjustments later. Sometimes it takes a little bit of digging and know-how, or just creativity, but there's always ways. And Kyle, I know in our prep session we talked a little bit about sort of the beauty of Rome being that it can be pretty forgiving in the way that you're doing sort of indentation, or the way that you're doing, any sort of formatting in the graph can be changed downline.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in some of my examples, you saw all these different structures I'm kind of using, but with querying and kind of incremental updates, everything's still findable, everything's still there. And I think one of the key features for me, at least, of Rome is that it's super low friction. I came to Rome after a few months of using Notion. Before that, bullet journals. I've Evernote. Before that, I've random markdown files locally saved on my computer and turned into HTML, all that. And Notion especially was tough, and Evernote was kind of similar in the sense where structure was a lot more important. So if you did change that down the line, it was really hard, at least for me, to implement that with old things and also to keep that structure going. Rome makes that a lot easier. And I can go back. So my daily notes template right now has a retrospective section. So I'll look back at when I generate the template for the day, it will give me a link to my previous week's notes, previous month's notes. So on that day, 1 week ago, on that day, 1 month ago, on that day, 3 months ago, and then a year ago. And so what I can do is I can go back and look at all my old notes and how I structured them and be like, wow, this is awful. Or, oh, I need to start doing this again. And that retrospective, I think, is really helpful because you can put what you've learned back into your past if you need to, or bring up stuff that you forgot, resurface it, and you have it there for you, ready to use.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to make this just this idea of the flexibility, maybe slightly more concrete, pull up an example that we had talked about on the Rome Summit graph, right? And Rob, maybe you can talk about this a little bit, but the core idea here being that like there are different structures, but ultimately they're accomplishing the same thing, right?
Yeah. Why don't I do a screen share here?
Sure.
Give me just a second. I'm gonna. Yeah. So basically, at the end of the day, like what's really important when you're editing within Rome is just to keep in mind your indentation and your references. Because like looking through linked references to pages and blocks, that's ultimately going to be the way that you can find just about anything in a way that's perhaps more flexible than a search bar is going to be. Because like a search bar, all it's going to do is search a specific line. So like if I'm searching right now, guided track onboarding, I'm going to pull up this block, which is right here where I've got my mouse right now. And it's not going to pull up this one right here. But at the same time, if I'm looking through the linked references to guided track, which I am right now, I'm going to see both this one and this one. So here's an idea for guided track onboarding. And then in this one, I have onboarding and idea indented underneath each other. Here I have idea for onboarding and guided track. But like if I filter by onboarding right now, I'm going to see both of these blocks right now. Functionally, like to Rome, I'm conveying the same information, that guided track and onboarding are related either through this block hierarchy right here, this tree here, which this JavaScript extension is meant to convey a little bit better, but alternatively through having it all in the same block. So like a lot of times what I'll do is, like if I'm if let's say I'm writing, like I might start out by writing something like, here's an idea, guided track onboarding. It's all in the same block. But then I realize like, oh, I want to talk about other things beyond that specific idea. So then I'll cut and paste and do that there. Here's an idea. But then I'll realize like, oh, I have some other thoughts on the guided track onboarding that are not ideas, but actually questions. So then I'll just like create this new hierarchy and put like an open question here. And so I'm still conveying the same information to Rome. It's just like different ways of organizing it.
Right. Right. I think that's a great example. Yeah. And again, a takeaway there is like, don't get too hung up on how you're doing your indentation and your linking, because ultimately that is one of the beauties of Rome, is that you're going to be able to find stuff. It's going to make the connections. How it looks visually might be different, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's about connecting those ideas. And there are lots of different ways that you can approach that and accomplish the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just the important thing to remember, though, is that you do still need to link the ideas in the way that in ways that represent how the ideas are actually linked. There are multiple ways to do it. You can either do it through indentation or through having the notes in the same block, but those are the ways that you connect ideas. So you kind of have that structure to work with.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we're about at our time, but Joel, I'd love to come to you to maybe close us out here with some of your high-level thoughts, again, on blocks versus pages. And I know you and I have talked a little bit about really kind of the building blocks almost, and the hierarchy, sort of knowledge synthesis, kind of the way that you think about this, I think might be a great place to bring us to a close.
Yeah, I think, to be very honest, my thinking is still evolving right now. I think there's a general consensus right now about one interesting way to use both blocks and pages is to think about like stages of development or maturity, where blocks have the freedom to be less developed. And if you want to sort of make something more of a building block, one way to do it is to turn into a page, so you can sort of let it grow over time and then start to have content in it, and then it becomes a page. To be very honest, I'm questioning that now because of all these query stuff. I'm very curious to see, and the community has shown really powerful kind of block level stuff. And from a data structure standpoint, blocks and pages are basically the same thing. Pages are a special case of blocks. But in general, like one workflow that's been very helpful is like, I have these similar to Rob, like I'll have these inline tags for questions and ideas. And in the early stages, I'll just tag it in the block level, and I can sort of query those and develop them. And then once it becomes somewhat mature and I feel like I keep coming back to it, then I turn it into a page so that I can reference it more easily through autocomplete in daily notes. And then once that inbox of linked references starts to get full, then I fill it out with content, and then it becomes sort of a more mature thing. That's one way to do it that I found useful for myself. But I'm really curious to see how the community evolves alternatives to that are much more kind of block-based, because I think it's possible. I really like the idea of like retaining the context. That's been a kind of persistent challenge of using page references is you just get the page reference. You can kind of do the embed, but it's like, you lose a lot of information. And sometimes I feel like I have a hard time just seeing the structure. So I think it's still an open game, right? How do you use blocks and pages? But I think I have a Twitter thread. I'm not going to belabor the point, but I'll kind of drop it in the YouTube chat. But having both blocks and pages really increases your expressivity to like a crazy level. Like you think about levels of compression. Both having a block in a page means that you have all these other stuff related to that block, and then referencing it to other things also increases levels of compression. So I'm going to have a hard time explaining it in this short time. So I'll just link to the Twitter thread where I kind of demonstrate how I was trying to figure out what's actually packed into my block, because I'm using pages and block references and markdown links. And it was kind of insane. It turned into like a 10 tweet thread or something like that to just like unpack all the information that's compressed into that one block, because I'm using both pages and blocks. And there's this question of like, if you have a page-centric workflow only, what do you lose? Or a block-centric workflow only? And I don't think any of us, Rob, Kyle, I, are either or. You mix the two, and that's part of the interesting thing about Roam, is that you have both pages and blocks. And Connor actually talked about this on Twitter, like, why do we even have pages? Why not just blocks? And it turns out when you have only blocks, you lose a lot of power. So that's maybe a topic for a different full Roam Summit itself, because I think that's still evolving. But there's something really interesting about having both of those, because the page-centric structure, hypertext, is old. It's very, very old. This idea of hypertext is as old as the internet, but it's always been very page-centric, kind of the wiki model. And something really interesting happened when we melded that with the outliner and made this graph database. And you really get this extra level of power that I think we're still figuring out. So that's a really exciting thing to kind of think through as a community.
Totally agree. And I think that's a great place to kind of wind it down, is a lot of this we're still figuring out. And hopefully, if nothing else, people take away from these conversations that there are lots of open questions and lots of different ways to approach Roam and get value out of it. No one right or wrong way. So Kyle, Rob, Joel, really appreciate you guys coming on and braving this first Roam Summit with me. This was a ton of fun. Lots of great comments there, you guys. So really appreciate it. As we're closing out, I just want to quickly mention, for those of you who may have showed up here today, but haven't yet subscribed to the email list, please do that at subscribe.roamsummit.com. That'll get you signed up. There's been a number of comments in the chat about, future sessions, and definitely there are more of those planned. So we're taking a kind of a non-traditional approach to the summit here. This is not going to be like a once a year, once every 6 months sort of big 2-day event type of thing. Right now, we really want to make it like a rolling summit. So we're going to have, the goal is to have at least one of these kind of anchoring sessions every month, with more smaller sessions sort of mixed in throughout that. So definitely go over to subscribe.roamsummit.com if you haven't already, and get signed up for that email list. I'll keep you posted. Rob, Kyle, Joel, thank you again so much. This was a ton of fun.
Yeah, thank you, Jason.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks everyone for being here, and we'll see you on the next one. Take care.